Hello and welcome to your Body Mind Therapy podcast. This is Sina and this is my first time doing this introduction in English. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining me in this real, deep, beautiful talk because it is not easy going into the uncomfortable. But I know from many times having to go there, when you're forced, and many times of also choosing to go there because I know that there's a lot of growth and a lot of life and, well, it's there either way, the uncomfortable. So I talked to my wonderful teacher and friend Tamsin Sheehy about that. It wasn't the plan. But it was a little bit because she's been my teacher for, I think 8 years now. And I love the practice that is slow and really kind of softly guides you into uncomfortable places, keeps you there longer than you really want to, but you learn so much. And she's being so open and so honest with us. The conversation was really beautiful and I learned so much and I was really deeply, deeply touched by the stories she's been sharing. We talk about death. We talk about losing someone we love. So if this is something that might be hard for you, that's a little trigger warning here. But we really look at the yoga practice, how the devotion, how the practice, how the philosophy and the science of it supports us in life with everything that life has to offer. And there's literally no gatekeeping with everything that I share. That's why I share my teachers with you. And I get to have the absolute pleasure to share their wisdom with you. And this is Tamsin, one of my most important teachers. And I hope you fall in love with her. So she's from South Africa. This is why this podcast this time is in English. Many of my teachers are English-speaking natives. So I hope you can dive in and learn, be touched, and take away something that, just kind of resonates with you deeply because it really did with me, like every time I got to practice with her. So dive in, enjoy the magic and the raw depth that is Tamsin Sheehy. Hello and welcome Tamsin Sheehy in the Kale and Cake Body Mind Therapy podcast. I'm so excited to have you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's so funny. Sometimes I wish you knew how often your name and your teaching comes up when I teach, because through the last years and like the time I've spent in your studio and with you has been such a huge impact in my teaching and just how you teach and the depth with how you teach and what you teach. So just a big, big, big thank you and shout out to what you share with the world because it's so profound, it's so deep, it's so real. And it really changed so much in my practice and how I see the world. So thank you so much for your work.
I would have to say that's a pleasure. I think that's hard for me to see, but thank you for lensing that, and I will take that.
So, just to kind of like get a feel of who Tamsin is, and it's always nice to also get to know you more, as like one of your students. And I would love to hear, so when did yoga enter your life and how did it enter your life? Because for me, it came really slowly and I was not interested and I didn't like it that much and it slowly crept its way. And like those people that keeps popping up and suddenly they're like your best friend. So how did yoga kind of enter your life and become this important part?
I was kind of thinking about that because you had posed that question, and I think there's so many threads that I was trying to weave together. I think as a child, I'll take it all the way back there. I was brought up in our religion in the home was a Catholic church, and I loved we had this beautiful Catholic church that we went to, and it was quite traditional and had the incense, and it had this incredible little alcove where there was, the lens of Mother Mary, and my second name is Mary. So I always kind of worked with that, and you could go and light all these little candles and this incense. And that was always to me like the most special place to be. And I've always had this deep connection to divinity and to God consciousness and that. And then at about 16, I was sitting in the Catholic church. You go for these kind of confessions. You like confess your sins. And I was sitting and I was looking at the priest and thinking like, what the hell am I doing here? I'm 16. I haven't sinned. Like this is ridiculous notion. And I remember leaving that and going like, oh, like, no, if that's spirituality, I don't want anything to do with it. Like if that's God, like, sorry, I'm kind of like, and then kind of went on this tangent of like calling myself an atheist for a few years and kind of like parked that part of me for a while. And then in matric, I had a very interesting science teacher who would take us through yoga poses. And I really liked that because I was in boarding school and it was something different to do. I was very sporty, but it was kind of like a different way of moving your body. And so that always intrigued me. So these kind of two threads were lying there. And then I think the first thread I picked up was more, not so much the spiritual thread that came later, was more, I was living in Edinburgh. It was 2000. I was there paying back my big student loan from South Africa and working quite hard. Started drinking beer a lot. In Edinburgh, I think as everyone does, like never drank beer in my life, suddenly like ordering the biggest pints. And I got to a place where I was like, I think I was 21 at the time or 22. And I was like, I'm not feeling 21. Like I don't feel great. And so kind of remembering the science teacher and remembering stuff my mom had done as when we were in child, I went out and started scouring for books on cleansing, books on yoga, and kind of started picking that up. So actually my thread in was I started cleansing, and then I started looking for yoga studios in Edinburgh, things that would fit into my schedule because I was working like 2 or 3 jobs. And that's kind of like how it all started. And for me, definitely first hook, like absolutely. I think I came back from my first yoga class. It was quite a strong, I think primary series of Ashtanga, and I couldn't move my body the next day. And I was just like, okay, this is it. I have definitely found what I'm looking for in terms of movement and consciousness. And then we started traveling quite soon after that. I probably practiced there for about a year and a bit, maybe a year and a half. And then so when I started traveling, I bought a mat and I bought a book, like a simple book. It wasn't one of the profound books that we have available. It was literally like Yoga for Dummies or something like that, you know? And for me, I've always found this, I think it came quite early that someone had said, you know, to build a yoga practice is like brushing your teeth. Like at first you're quite reluctant to do it as a child, but then you eventually get to a point where you never leave the house or go to bed without brushing your teeth. And that made real good sense to me. I was like, oh, of course. And so rolling out my little mat and popping out my book became my kind of brushing my teeth. And so it kind of built quite easily in me. And then wherever we traveled, so I lived in Cornwall for a bit and then later lived in Thailand, and then with my, you know, kept my practice, but then always sought out a teacher. Wherever I was, I'd look, even if it was, you know, in Cornwall, I was practicing with like the grannies in the Scout Hall in Padstow, and I'd cycle and go practice with the, you know, the 60-year-olds. And just loved it. I loved all of it. I loved everything that yoga had to offer. And when I lived in Thailand, going into Thailand, coming back to the spiritual part and picking up my first book on Buddhism and picking up my first book on reincarnation. And I was like, oh, bringing me all the way back to my spiritual side and then like connecting that with this incredible movement practice and really taking care of the body, in a way that was kind of natural and easy, not, what's the word? Not when you're making a lot of sacrifices. That's definitely not my vibe. And then kind of blending the two. And I was like, oh, I'm coming back to my spiritual being. I'm coming back to that sense of divinity and sanctuary and sanctuary and sanctum inside of myself. And I was like, oh, these two connect completely. And so that year in Thailand, it was the year 2002 to 2003, that's where everything kind of solidified for me personally. And then at the end of March of that year, 2003, and I'd really had this incredible, I would say, an awakening, but also it felt very natural. It was an awakening that made me go in a different direction. It was like, oh, I'm just awake and I'm conscious in my body. And we were living in Thailand. I was with my partner at the time. We were together for 4 years. And when I met him, his name's Jeremy. When I met him, he was already awake. He was born very connected to God consciousness and he was part of the catalyst, but so was yoga and so was kind of just opening myself. And he died actually in a tragic accident while we were living in Thailand. And it both shattered me and solidified me all at the same time. I was in a place so connected to my soul at that time is that when I actually got the call and the confirmation from the hospital, I immediately knelt down on a piece of grass in the garden. And I was like, my soul came through very clearly and was like, you signed this contract. You, on a soul level, you knew. And so you've been preparing yourself through the literature you're reading, through coming back to your spirituality, through your practices. You have prepared yourself. And now, yes, you've got to come into the earth body and do the grief because it's big grief work. But that connection to my soul was so clear, so crystal clear, that was definitely the thread that helped me over the next 4 years grieve consciously, process consciously, but also not leave the path that I was already on. So still rolling up my mat, even if it was to do a child's pose, like still one foot in front of the other, still living a conscious existence, going through this process in the best way that I knew that I could stay connected to God consciousness, stay connected through my body, and do the difficult work of grieving someone that I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. And so kind of that really set me up. And at the time, I was teaching English and I'd been kind of in the hospitality industry, and a friend of mine that I was living with, because we were living in Thailand and that's where he died. And at the time I was like, my whole world is shattered. Like, I don't know how to carry on. And she said to me, you know what? You should really do a yoga teacher training. And I was like, I'd never really thought about that. And I thought, well, that would be really interesting because it would give me, because I knew I needed to leave Thailand and come back to South Africa and be with my parents and just heal. But I also knew I needed the next thing. Like, I needed to know where I was going next. And so she was like, there's a teacher training. There's a really good teacher that she had heard of from Australia, Louisa Sears, and she does these trainings in Bali, and that's a good. And I just remember, and even it was the morning of Jeremy's funeral. And I woke up and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to get myself through this. I'm going to work hard. I'm going to get the money together and I'm going to go do a teacher training. And I set my benchmark for a year because I knew that's how long it would take me to get the money together and to get myself together. But it was such a anchor point. And then obviously it helped me keep up my practice because I was like, I'm going to do my teacher training. And then that's what I did. So then in 2004, I did my first teacher training. And it was interesting because at the time, I was probably still I was still in quite active grief. So I kind of kept myself to myself, but was really amazed at how much processing I was able to do just through the physical practice. I remember in that year before my teacher training, my mom kept on saying to me, I think you need to go, everyone's saying you need to go see a psychologist because you need to talk about what happened. You guys were so young, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you know what? I just really don't think I need to. I really feel like I'm very connected to my soul. I've heard my messages. I've got my physical practice. I've got my meditation practice. I just don't think I need it. And for me, I was right. So I'm not saying it was for everyone, but for me, that was the right thing to do. And so I did my teacher training in 2004 and then started, what did I do? I did in Bali, went to Thailand a little bit, had another memorial for Jeremy, then came back to South Africa and started teaching, and also did a second yoga teacher training, which was more in the therapeutic, more in the cleansing, the stuff that I was interested before. I did kind of more of Ashtanga, Iyengar. And that really set me up for my life and my career. And because I had utilized the practices for so many different healing aspects of me, whether it was healing a body with too much beer in it, or healing a grieving heart, or understanding and healing my connection back to God and back to my spirit, was like, oh, this all makes sense. Like there's nothing I ever have to do. And then when I thought, well, after my first teacher training, I thought, well, if I teach, then I can always learn. And that kind of became the concept of my like equal student, equal teacher, because if I make this my career, well, then the only thing I need to do to help me with my career is keep going on training. So I was like, oh yeah, sign me up. That sounds fantastic. And, since then, so many trainings, right? It's I less so now, but any training opportunity I'll get, I'll take it. And then kind of circling, I came back to, then I met my husband now in Edinburgh. I was back in Edinburgh in the beginning stages of 2000, I think it was 2006. And, we just kind of met and immediately had this connection. And at the time, I kind of knew I wanted to move back to Cape Town and put roots down and said to him within a month, I was like, I love you. I think I love you, but I want to move back to South Africa. So, would you like to come? And he was like, yeah, sure. I'll come to South Africa. And that's where we kind of landed. So I had a little stint in India by myself. But besides that, we kind of married within 6 months. We moved to Cape Town in the end of 2006, beginning of 2007. And at the time, I started teaching at an Ashtanga studio. But because I had done all this other training on cleansing and digestive work and yoga nidra, and I was like, I don't want to just teach the primary series or second Z series. I need to teach other stuff. And so I started teaching. There was not much yoga in Cape Town at that stage. And then that Ashtanga studio within 6 months had to close down for lease issues, and there was nothing else. There was one hot studio in town, and that wasn't my offering. That's not where yeah. And so I decided to open my own little thing. And we got this tiny, I don't know if you ever came to the first studio, but we had this tiny little room where it was like 12 mats. It was an office space, but it had 3 walls of windows. And I was like, oh, beautiful, light, amazing. And I kind of worked out that if I had 1 student per class, I could pay rent. And I was like, oh, that's fine. I'll have 1 student per class, pay rent, waitress at night, teach by day. The first studio we took 200 Rand and made little flyers and put them on everyone's cars. It was way before social media. This was kind of October 2007. And we had like a little card where it said was your name, Tamsin Sheehy. And then I had a punch pass, like a little punch that would clip off so you'd buy 5 classes or 10 classes, then you'd punch and it all went into like an old fashioned Rolodex. And that's how I started. And I remember a friend coming to visit me from Australia probably a year in, and she was like, do you know this thing called Facebook? And I was like, no, And she was like, you should put your studio on Facebook. And I mean, it's such a different time. And so, yeah, I ran that studio for 4 years, and we kind of were bursting at the seams eventually. And then walking around the neighborhood, found where we currently are, which is 15 Vandal, which was this beautiful heritage building. And then kind of did a little bit of a change in, just wanted a more beautiful logo and a more beautiful space, and like put some money behind it, from a teacher training that we were running, and started the Shala, which is in its current guise, but it's kind of changed a few times because we only had the money to have the top part of the studio, and then eventually, kind of to where we are now. And, that's kind of been the teaching part of it, and many other trainings. And I think how I kept and still do my kind of teaching, motivation, inspiration alive, is that I kind of split my teaching in 3. So one was studio classes. And so eventually wasn't teaching all the studio classes, eventually got other teachers to come and help and support. But I love my studio classes. But as everyone knows, like studio classes can become, if you're only doing that, they can become like, oh, another studio class. Where do you get your motivation? Where you get your inspiration? So I kind of then had limited studio classes, and then started my what I call my privates. And so my private work has always been more with a therapeutic lens. So the privates that I've had for the longest, I've now been teaching this couple for 18 years. And Vincent, he'll be 81 this year. So I started teaching them in their 60s. And so most of my private clients I've had 18 years, 10 years, 12 years. And more kind of therapeutic or older body yoga. And that's really been so rich and rewarding. I've also done, I also kind of, not formally, but have been a death doula last year for one of my students that I had for 13 years, and helped her transition to the other side. Through the practices, through presence, through yoga, but through, meditation and presence, and then teacher training. So these kind of 3 lenses have always kind of been able to keep that motivational pot really full, I don't know how else you would, keep a career and motivated in your own practice and how you share the practices, because the vastness of yoga is so amazing. You know, you've got your physical practices, but you've also got so many other practices that are off the mat that are still yoga. And so that's always kind of what I wanted, for my career, for my work balance.
Thank you, Tamsin. Thank you for sharing so honestly and so raw, right? Sharing all those moments that were also really painful, and then how you interacted and how this kind of trajected you into your today. Thank you for sharing. And what I find, or what I felt, and I think obviously that's like different for students and what you share and how we feel it, but also what you now shared and how you're also working as a death doula and like guiding your friend to the other side. You know, it's not just someone, it's like even a friend. And you don't shy away from dark spaces. It feels like you don't shy away from where nobody wants to look at. Like, my friend Lily, who's your dear student, we met through, that I found out through her bio that you are her teacher. And then I sent her a message saying like, we need to meet. And we kept talking that when I'm in your class, I've had a few moments of you teaching like the organs, you know, like cueing deeply into the organs and saying things like the word anus in your yoga class, like something that we don't even say out loud in a conversation and would never think of like using as one of the words in a yoga class, you know, where everything's kind of like beautiful and holy and like fairies and, you know, and I love how you, with your cueing, how you teach, how you really go into the stickiness, into the darkness, into like the places that we don't want to look at or just kind of like hide away. Is that also something that is like, can you relate to that, and how maybe we can learn from the dark places, the sticky places, and what maybe they can teach us?
Well, that's the growth.
Yeah.
You know, that's where all the growth happens. It's in those sticky, dark, discomfort, uncomfortable places. So, you know, the practice of yoga, I think it was Swami Satyananda said, like, yoga is not an ancient practice buried in oblivion. It has to be a practice that is for the now and that is contemporary and that is ever shifting, and it's a living practice. And so when we look, for me, yoga is refinement, refining mind, body, soul. When we want refinement and true transformation, that's only going to come through the sticky, the discomfort. You know, when you look back at your life and go, when were my biggest growths? It is when it was awful. Or it is when I looked at the shit inside of me. Or it is when I faced death and didn't turn away. You know, the very precept of Shavasana is facing your death in every practice that you do. You lie in corpse pose and you go, one day I'll take my last breath. And to, you know, I always think like we are born to understand death, and then we die. And we should, the journey towards our death should be that refinement of understanding death. In doing so, we understand life. But people don't want to go to the death or the shit or the excretory organs. It's like, well, let's discuss that delicious, you know, yoga berry smoothie I had. And it's like, well, I would rather discuss your bowel movements. I'd rather discuss that because that is more telling to me. You know, it's in that, the proverbial letting go, the surrender, that is when we understand, like, what is it to live with purpose? What is it to transform, to transmute energy? I I think maybe it's just always naturally been a fascination for me. It's not something I've kind of had to work on. It's something that I'm very comfortable with. I'm comfortable in that discomfort because that's where I see the most growth. Yeah.
I love that.
I think like also, each organ in the body, well, everything's from one cell, right? So the cell in your anus and your cell in your eye are really the same cell. They just serve a different function. And it's interesting how we as humans have decided, well, this is nice and that's not. It kind of comes back to our previous conversation when it's like that in the field of right and wrong, I'll meet you there. Or can we stop lensing good or bad? Or like, this is a fight. We can talk about the shoulder in yoga, but you can't talk about your large intestine or your armpit or the entrance to your vagina. Why can't we talk about that? Like, why is that anatomy left out? But talking about your rotator cuff is okay when I want people and I want myself to become more and more and more comfortable in this incredible body. And the incredible body is on, it's on all its layers and all its aspects. And I think if you're comfortable in that and then you bring that to a studentship, then you allow people in the privacy of their own, internal awareness to go like, oh yes, maybe I haven't actually thought about my large intestine today, this year, or ever. But actually lensing that is, that famous saying of like, energy follows thought, right? So I direct my thought there and energy's flowing there. And so for so many people, they don't direct their thought to the excretory system. So could that then translate that no energy is flowing there?
And we all have digestive issues.
Yeah, we got so many digestive issues. And then I think, on another lens, I wasn't even going to say this, but I was just thinking about this now, this other lens of like, then so much energy flows to our faces. We lens our faces. And so then people start to nitpick on their face and go, well, I need this changed or that changed or it's like, but energy follows thought. So you're thinking about your face, you're looking at your face, like you're putting too much energy in your face. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, let's balance the energy and actually think about all the different parts of your body and how they serve you so well and how your body is this incredible manifestation of your spirit and how we need to take care of all those little bits that are kind of unseen, and not just the bit that you forward facing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. Thanks for that. And yeah, just that there's the growth. That really hit home. I'm in this transformational time now. And I'm like, damn it. There's no way around it if I want to get somewhere else than I am at right now. And the growth is where it's scary, where it's dark, where it's uncertain, where it's uncomfortable. How would you translate that for someone listening and also for yourself and me into the practice, other than I know it from your words, like how you cue? I know it how I feel in your practice, because it's like in a gentle way you guide, or like how I've experienced it, into quite intense and uncomfortable places, but with love. And then you keep and you keep. And you're like, are you experiencing this? I real. But how could you like explain that? How does it translate in your own practice? Like, how do you practice for yourself, or how do you teach to make people more comfortable in this uncomfortable space and darkness and connect them to their soul through that, hopefully?
For me, I regard the physical practice as training for mind and body. And so over the years, so for me, like the practice is like meditation in action. And just so someone would train themselves to sit 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 20 minutes. I've got the same kind of idea when both in my own personal practice and when I'm teaching, is that to truly be in asana is all of you is there. And so it requires all of your consciousness to be there. And then when it gets difficult, you stay for a little bit longer and you just build that tiny bit more capacity to stay. And that fine balance between building the capacity to stay in an uncomfortable place, not in a place that's hurting, not in a place that is injuring, but in a place that's just on that edge that builds your capacity. Because for me, the practice on the mat is the fun part. The real practice is how you take that off your mat. So if you align really well in something like Utthita Trikonasana, and you're very specific about the way you've placed your body, and then you stay, and you try to be conscious that that alignment stays and the muscles are firming and toning enough that it's not costing you energy, but that it's resourcing you, and you stay. And it's maybe a little bit boring or a little bit uncomfortable or it's pushing that boundary of like, get me the fuck out of here. But you stay. That then translated off the mat is gold. So the fun part is the practice. Getting on your mat and doing a 10-minute headstand, as hard as that seems, over time, you build that capacity. That is gold. When you find yourself in the world and someone's throwing you a bunch of shit, or you're in a very difficult circumstance and you want to react, or we were talking about this earlier with a young child, you want to bite your baby back. It's the 10-minute headstand that is, for me, the most helpful. Because in that moment, I take myself back to the training on the mat and train myself not to react, to pause, to observe, to pull back, to respond for sure, but not to react, not to lash out, not to make those decisions that are not the best decision, because I haven't trained myself to be able to stay and hold my ground when it's difficult. So for me, the pleasure part is on my mat and nudging and edging those boundaries. When I teach, that's a natural progression of how I practice. And I've been very, very lucky in in 2010, I was introduced to, Patrick Creelman, who's still one of my main teachers, Renat Perlman, who's also one of my main teachers in Hong Kong. And they both of them teach with such a great capacity of training, diligence, discipline. And they were really instrumental in helping me develop that part of my practice and my teaching. Currently in South Africa, I've had a teacher, Yvonne de Kock, here for probably 12 years. I go to her every Tuesday, super advanced class. And you just go and you do, and you train and you listen, and you don't injure your own body, but there is a certain level of discipline and training that you do on your mat. And then what I've seen, as I said, in the rest of my life, that it's translated to places that I can hold, going back to death doulaing. There's actually not much to it. You just got to hold yourself in presence. No distraction. No trying to get out of it. Just full presence. Again, if I lens back to a 10-minute headstand, the only place you can be is there. If you lose it for 1 minute, you'll fall out. You might hurt your neck. You're straining your right shoulder. You can't do any of that. It has to be perfect balance for that time. Now, that might only be 10 minutes, But that 10 minutes then over 10, 20 years suddenly becomes something that, oh, I can hold full presence all the time because I've built that capacity.
I love that, because I can totally see from coming from dance and flowing and like being like really going where it's comfortable and exciting or looks good, that I'm more going into staying in places for a longer time, getting more curious. And at the same time, I see that it's really hard as a teacher and as someone who holds yoga spaces to go a little bit into actually the opposite of what people want right now, but actually give them more of what they need. So everybody wants like the fun and fancy flows from one thing to another, where you can kind of like do something that's hard looks tricky on the outside and fancy, but actually because you're going through things, just one breath, one movement maybe, and it's just like kind of like a dance, but you lose a lot of like staying and building that capacity. And obviously both things can exist, right? But it's so hard to sometimes just to keep people in a space, because that's not where we want to be. And understanding that is something that helps me long term is so hard in such a short-term minded society. And as humans, we are short-sighted. We are short in like a short mind of like, what's going to help me later? Because you always look for what you need right now. How can you maybe motivate and take someone, well, I guess all your words already were really motivating to stay with this, but either also as a teacher to be incorporating that more and to use, and that's something that I now say, because you said it to me in class a few times, I heard it. For me, that what you're saying is turning yoga into a medicine. That's just how I make the connections of your teachings. How can you make yoga more into medicine? Maybe looking at this, how you practice and like going to the dark places.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is spatial medicine. You taking a dose of spatial medicine. I think the way I try to do that in a class situation, when you're just teaching, say, an hour, how do you teach that in an hour class, is to do a little bit of both, is to incorporate a bit of flow, because flow is really nice. And it's so, we are sensitive water bodies, we need to flow. And we need to kind of express like that. And the body needs to be fluid. So with the strict aligned Trikonasana poses, like, for me, like a purely Iyengar class is like, oh my God, this is so dry and so boring. I know it's good for me, but am I going to necessarily, like go to that twice a week? No. But what we can do is create a balance where we have a few moments in the class where, say, you're teaching a really strong, I'll just go back to Trikonasana, really strong Trikonasana with the detailed alignment on both sides. But then the very next shape allow a flow, whether it's a cat-cow or spinal rolls or lymphatic movements or something to release that intensity and then come back to the intensity. And so when I'm looking at like the building of a class, it's like, well, I actually would like to offer something for everybody, those people that like the intensity and those people that like the flow but need the intensity. I think we can have it both. But I think like a class that is just all flow and there's a lightness, I think we miss the capacity to hold in those kind of more strength building moments. I'd say kind of like trying to do a little bit of both within the cocoon of a class, and reading the room. You sometimes you get carried away, sometimes you get carried away with the detailed and the alignment and the strength, and you can see people checking out. And then sometimes there's an offer of please stay, please come back into the room with your consciousness. And sometimes it's like, oh, okay, actually that's enough, Tam. like get them to move. Everybody come up, let's do a surya, or let's flow through that little sequence, or let's do some lymph, or let's shake it out, or let's run around the room, or go into a handstand or something. And so I like to poke to a certain place, but if you poke too much, or if you put too much of if you're not seeing where the student is at, I don't think that you're winning either. So it's like reading the room constantly, knowing, you might come in to a class and you've got this very specific thing. Well, actually, we're going to work like this, and it's going to be, and you read the room and like, not everyone's that keen for it. And so you got a decision. Do I push through and maybe this is going to be valuable, or do I just pull back a little bit? And that's what's quite exciting about every class, where like nothing is the same, because you different showing up in that moment, and everybody's coming into the class in a different space. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
It really does. It really helps.
It depends.
It depends, right? It depends. That's always the answer, right? It depends, or both. Right? I love that. Okay. So there's one segue I need to take, because it's been on my mind since last time we saw each other. Mm-hmm. So maybe for everyone listening, I was in Cape Town, right, when Jonas was just 5 months old. So that's over a year ago. And I had the incredible joy of having privates with you on a deck and in Scarborough overlooking the ocean. And the fun part is actually, Tamsin, I can barely remember the practice. I can barely remember the practice we did, because I think I was so present. I remember our conversations. I remember doing Titibhasana with you, because I hate Titibhasana. And I remember doing it. But just like that, I got to spend such precious time, and being so present that I don't really remember the time. And there's no photos, there's no videos, there's nothing of it. And it's still so deeply embedded in my memory. And then I also had the pleasure to come to your studio, which is beautiful. So I know lots of people from Munich and in Germany travel to Cape Town, and don't miss the Shala. I tell that to everyone. Go to the Shala. It's such a beautiful space. It's such a special place, and it's so raw and so real. And the people there are amazing. And if you're lucky, you can have one of Tamsin's classes or one of her amazing teachers. And you have this beautiful painting on the wall of a snake. Mm-hmm. So that was a really big kind of circle. But I just wanted to set the scene. And I was like, and I love that. I looked at the painting. And that day I drew one of the cards. You have those Oracle tarot cards. And I drew a snake card. And I was like, And I remember you just, because it was after class, there was a lot going on. And then you just there was a 5-minute conversation about snakes, which is also for me is one of those dark, misunderstood roles in our story. And you told me a little bit about it. And so I wanted to ask you again, the snake, what does she stand for? And I think it's just kind of like you said already, the picture before, the threads, the medicine, the darkness. Yes. There's also a lot of femininity and the role of the woman in the world. But so maybe I just need to have this to listen to it again and again.
Well, it's interesting because, going back to my childhood, I was always loved snakes. And I remember being on a camp where I must have been about 10. And it was time for, we were somewhere. I hardly remember anything about the camp. All I remember is being at the back of the bus, and we were driving home from the camp, and I had a snake. And the teacher coming back and going what the hell? The whole bus had to stop. Everyone had to get out, and I had to release my snake. And I was completely perplexed as to what the issue was. And I don't know. It was such a bizarre memory, but I just remember like letting the snake go and going like, oh, but it's my snake. And so I think I've just always loved the snake. I think, you know, there's obviously universal symbols of it being the goddess. I like that you lens the she of the snake. The obvious layers of transformation, but you stay authentic, right? You shed your skin, but it's still you. And so I've always liked this idea of like, I don't really understand this idea of reinventing yourself. Like maybe it's because from a child, I always kind of knew who I was in my essence. And maybe that was the deep connection to divinity that I've always had. But this idea of transformation and shedding a layer that no longer serves you, when we all shed, you know, when your skin is dry and you even rub it, you shedding, you know, when I do all my lymph work, you shedding your skin all the time. We kind of are snakes all the time. We're shedding layers that no longer serve us. So that's kind of like being my thing. But that particular snake, one of my best friends, Robin Denny, who created that snake, she was doing a big, she's back living in Australia now, but they were in Australia for a year, and she was doing work on the medicinal animals of the Aboriginal culture in Australia, the indigenous Aboriginal culture in Australia. And so that's the red belly snake from Australia, one of the highest medicine snakes in indigenous culture. And in most indigenous cultures around the world, snake medicine is one of the most powerful medicines that we can have in the natural kingdom. And so she sent me a photo of the snake, and I was like, oh my God, I love that so much. And it couldn't go into an exhibition. And so when she said, well, this is getting shelved, I was like, well, do you want to trade? And I'll give you a lifetime of yoga. Can I have the snake? And she was like, you can have the snake. And then of course I had to frame it in gold, because gold is for me the highest vibrational color. And so for me, it was always that element of, yes, goddess, but a transformation. And obviously being my best friend, she's also the godmother of our child. So very close in me. And, it's a very powerful medicine. And again, that thing of like, everyone lenses to the venom and the death that comes. And then with that goes, I don't want to go there. But it's like, but the venom and the death is the transformation. That is where again, lensing, like we should really understand our own death to be able to understand how to live. Like for me, that's a symbol every day.
Oh, I love that. I really love that.
And it's beautiful. I mean, if you hold a snake, they are just incredible. They're incredible to hold, the way they move, their scales, the patterns. It's one of the most beautiful creatures that we share the earth with.
And it's also funny.
And bloody scary. Like now I wouldn't pick up a snake. Like, believe me, I love seeing them, but like, I'm not going to go pick up a snake.
It's funny because they are really scary. And I think, I don't know, I think I learned that from you too, that Kundalini, which is, you know, the representation of our sleeping potential, of like the awakening of our energy. And it is a snake, right? And it is a feminine energy. I never knew. It took me a really long time to learn that it is a feminine energy. And then we have this, it's framed in this Christian picture of being something that ruined the paradise, that it's bad, you know? And I love—
They did a very good job of that.
Right?
Yeah.
And I love kind of like looking at things again, like we had that conversation before, like we had over a half-hour wonderful conversation before starting the podcast, and how you said, and that was beautiful, that when you were young, you wanted to be right. And now older, you're excited to be wrong. And that's kind of like looking at things again. learning. And then maybe we're having the capacity and the opportunity to reframe something if you look at it more closer and get to know it a little better, like the snake.
And have an opportunity to expand. And I think that's the thing with the aging process and when you are in practice is that with the transformation, you're also expanding. You're not narrowing, you're growing. And you are expanding, releasing, programmed ways of thinking about things and being in the world and expanding to a much more, expansive place where a new lens is put on anything all the time. And you can see that in the aging process when you meet someone that is in their 80s, that is just expanding and learning and growing, and you meet someone in the same age bracket that is narrowing, and there's a big difference between these two people. Again, there's no right or wrong, but it's like, where do you want to be? Where do you want to be?
Yeah. I have two role models, the Janes, Jane Goodall and Jane Fonda, because kind of imagining traveling like what I think Jane Goodall travels like, I don't know, 300 days of the year. And she just turned 91. And Jane Fonda is in her late 80s, still making movies and getting arrested for fighting for what's right and for the environment. That is where I'm looking at, how I want to be. And I think how you now described it, now that's it. I can understand better what might be drawing me there. Like this, I can still learn, I can still expand. I'm still conscious and not just already checking out, which obviously is a valid decision if that's where you want to go, and that's totally fine. But do I want to, check out, or do I want to dive in with everything that life has to offer, which is the sticky parts, the death, the darkness. But that's where we find all the beauty. This is just amazing. Tamsin, is there something that you would have loved to know a little earlier? Maybe some learning that you wish you had known earlier, wish everybody would hear, something that's just kind of popping up through the conversation or way out of it or somewhere else?
Everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. I think that's what we all need to hear now and then, right?
But I mean, I tell that to my teenage daughter and she's like, it's like, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Yeah. I was very blessed. I am very blessed with an amazing mother that has always had my back. And so, that in the world has been gold. I really realize that the more I hear of other people's stories and the trauma that a lot of people have had in childhood. So when I say everything's going to be okay, I know it's coming from a place of privilege and a place of having parents that really loved me and cared for me and did the best with what they had at the time. But I think this idea of really being connected to your soul and lensing that as something that is a daily practice. I'm trying to teach that to Chloe. She's rolling her eyes, but that is something I think I got naturally, but maybe would have benefited from if someone kept lensing that to me, like connect to your soul, connect to that part of you that is eternal, that is vibrational, that is frequency, that is whole, that is connected to source. You don't need another avenue to connect to source. It's only through yourself and your soul. And listen to that advice. This thing that I have kind of more understood better in the last few years is that these three intelligences that we have, we've got our head brain where we gather, information and resources. And it's such an exciting time to be alive because you can basically gather information on anything that comes your way. And there's so many podcasts and media and movies and docies and stuff like that you can fill your head brain with. But that is just information. You've got to lens that through the heart brain, which for me, heart brain is that connection to soul and the wisdom that exists within. That wisdom cannot be found in a book. Like there is no teacher for that wisdom. You can't find it in a podcast. It might ignite something, but that wisdom in your heart to, pull out the information that you are gathering all the time, what is relevant for you and what is going to help you lead a life of purpose is in that heart brain. And as we know now, like the electromagnetic field of the heart brain, I think, is 100 times more than the head brain. The capacity of the heart to hold is way vaster than we've lensed the head brain. And then together with the gut brain, and the gut brain coming back to the intestines and coming back to the intelligence and the intuition that is within us, that gut feeling, that gut reaction, that knowing that the body never lies. It always gives you the information for you might be in a meeting and there's a decision you need to make in the meeting, and the head saying something and the heart saying something. For me, where the gut comes in is it like helps you discern what is good for you, what is really powerful, the right way, the right choice, depending on what your gut is saying. And how do you interpret that? I think is our lifetime of work. That flutter, is that interpreting like, oh, there's a lot of anxiety here, say no? Or is it in so much excitement, say yes? No one can give you that answer, but then going through the logical mind and then the wisdom of the heart can help you discern. So I think also like lensing those three as a way to navigate your decisions in the world. And as small as like, if lucky enough to have the choice of what to have for breakfast, that I try and take all those three into my consciousness when I choose, is it going to be, fruit and coffee, or do I need to have eggs and toast? Like those simple things that, later on in the day, you might have made the wrong decision, but if you had listened to yourself, you would have made the right decision. Yeah. Everything's going to be okay. And these three intelligences that you can navigate yourself with.
Oh, I love that. That's so helpful. Amazing. It's so funny when you let go of the control, then conversations happen at the exact time that you need them. And this is how this felt, having this time with you now today. Tamsin, thank you so much. You also have an amazing online studio with amazing classes and content. So everybody who's not in South Africa in the next few weeks or days, as it is now turning into winter in South Africa, you can go online. We will put the link in the show notes, obviously, and you can practice with Tamsin online. I've done it many, many times, loving and hating it on the mat at the same time.
Damn you.
But always feeling so good afterwards. And thank you so much, Tamsin, for your time. Thank you for your wisdom.
Oh, yay.
And I can't wait to practice with you, to see you again, all the connections.
Have you got a trip planned?
Not yet. But, it's just a flight away. It's not that far.
Not that far.
No.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me to speak so freely.
Yeah. Thank you for your wisdom, your honesty, and hope to see you very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Cheers.